Snow swallowed sound and distance until everything became white and impact. Dark figures were scattered across the valley floor, broken up by wrecked vehicles and shallow, hastily kicked snow berms that weren't covered so much as wishful thinking. Machine gun rounds stitched through the drifts, kicking up little geysers of powder around the pinned platoon. It was noon, but the sky overhead was a flat, colorless sheet, the sun a dull glow behind it, making everything glare and flatten. You couldn't judge how far anything was. The ridgelines looked painted on. Contact, right? Right and left, someone shouted, voice cracking. The answer was a wall of sound. Overlapping bursts from both sides of the valley, rounds pinging off metal and whining into the open. A troop carrier squatted at an ugly angle where its front end had sunk into the snow, engine dead, wheels half buried. Another vehicle burned farther up the route, column of greasy black smoke twisting straight up into the washed-out sky and then disappearing into it, like ink in milk. Lieutenant Connor Thorne slammed himself into the side of an engine block, chest heaving, fingers locked so tight around his radio handset that his knuckles had gone pale. Beyond the vehicle, he saw shapes moving, men in white and gray parkas no more distinct than shadows, muzzle flashes popping along the ridges. The enemy had height, angles, and the patience to let the platoon drive right into the bowl before opening up. Sunray, this is Hunter 2-1. Troops in contact. Troops in, he shouted into the mic. Static answered him. Not the usual chatter or congestion, but a thick, angry buzz that devoured his words. Every few seconds, a fragment punched through. Say again, Hunter, unreadable, check, then nothing but a rising metallic hum. He smacked the radio with his fist. Come on, come on. A mortar round landed far short, a low thump in the snow, then another, closer. The air shook, spraying grit and ice over his helmet. On the far side of the valley, someone screamed, a tearing sound cut off mid-breath. They're walking it in. The platoon mortarman yelled across the chaos, voice raw. They're bracketing us, sir, they're... His sentence dissolved into another explosion, this one close enough that Thorne tasted earth and cordite. A young private broke from a shallow scrape ahead, too exposed. He pushed himself out of the snow and tried to sprint toward a lump of rocks 20 meters away, his boots slipping in the churned powder. He made maybe 5 steps. Rounds hit his torso and legs, snapping him sideways. He crumpled face first into the snow, body twitching once. "Rook!" screamed the medic, throwing himself out after him without thinking, sliding on his knees. The medic hooked gloved hands into the private's vest and started dragging, boots digging for purchase, leaving a dark smear in their wake. Rounds swatted the snow inches away from his boots. Ricochets whined over their heads. "Smoke out!" Thorne yelled, voice cracking on the last word. A handful of grenades were yanked free, metal spoons popped with practice motions. Soldiers lobbed them as far as they dared. The grenades landed with soft, almost polite thumps compared to the mortar blasts, then spewed thick white clouds into the already white world, a denser, chemical fog rolling low across the valley floor. On my call, we bound to that rock shelf. Thorne pointed with a gloved hand toward a jagged protrusion halfway between the wrecked lead vehicle and the right side slope. It wasn't much, but right now it looked like a fortress wall. He counted breaths, the air burning his lungs, waiting for the smoke to thicken. "Go," he barked. A squad rose as one from their scrapes, hunched and running through the smoky snow like figures on a flickering film reel. For almost 2 seconds there was no fire, no sound but their boots and the ragged chorus of their breathing. Then a new line of tracer fire cut in from higher up the ridge, perfectly angled to rake the gap they were crossing. It appeared from nowhere, as if someone had simply opened a door to a different battlefield. Snow spat up around their thighs. One soldier spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Another stumbled and crashed into a friend, both going down in a tangle. "Get down! Back! Back!" Thorne yelled, throat raw. The survivors dove, some making it to the rock shelf, others falling short, bodies pressed flat to the snow. The smoke that had been their cover shredded under the new fire like cobwebs. "Lieutenant, we can't stay here." Staff Sergeant Kerr shouted from somewhere to his left. "They're gonna pinwheel us. We either push or we." A mortar detonated close behind them, throwing a shower of snow and gravel over their heads. Bits of something wet landed on Thorne's sleeve. He didn't look to see what it was. His radio crackled again, phantom words lost in the humming. He switched channels, tried the company net. Nothing. The buzzing rose and fell like someone spinning a dial, drowning out everything else. "Sir, I got nothing," the RTO said, eyes wide, crouched beside him. "Nothing on any channel. It's like they shut the whole sky off." Thorne's mind raced. No comms. Vehicles disabled. Both ridges alive with fire. An L-shaped kill box, he realized distantly, the kind they'd briefed in classrooms as avoid at all costs. He'd driven his people right into it. Another round struck the burning vehicle, and the fuel tank finally gave up. The explosion punched a hole in the air, a deep, concussive boom that sucked the breath from his chest. The burning truck belched flame, a dozen new fires blooming from ruptured panels. Black smoke funneled up, mixing with the overcast, a dirty black-gray column against the white. "Give me a line to anyone," he said to the RTO, though it was pointless. "I don't care who. I'll take the cook at battalion. Just give me someone." The RTO nodded frantically and bent over the radio again, as if Shearwell could force the signal through. For a moment, the gunfire seemed to ease. Not because the enemy were relenting, but because Thorne's senses had reached their limit. Everything became muffled, as if he were underwater, hearing through his chest rather than his ears. The only clear sound was the keening wind, hissing over the snow, tugging at loose cloth and smoke. He pressed his cheek to cold metal, breathing in shallow sips. Men around him shifted in their holes, muttered prayers, spat curses. Some went disturbingly quiet, staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard look he'd hoped he'd never see in people this young. On the ridge, muzzle flashes still flickered, but slower now, like blinking lights on a distant tower. As he watched, one line of fire adjusted slightly, rounds snapping closer to his current position, stitching toward their last functioning vehicle, the one that still housed their most important passenger and a locked metal case beside him. They were being dialed in, meter by meter. Thorne squeezed his eyes shut for half a heartbeat, feeling the bitter taste of failure rise in his throat. When he opened them again, snow was still drifting down, fine as dust. The battlefield took a breath. The roar of incoming rounds fell off for a handful of seconds. The mortars paused. The machine gun that had been chewing up the center of the valley stopped mid-burst. The only noise was the wind and the crinkle of gear as soldiers shifted. In that eerie lull, time thinned. A voice slipped into the gap. "You dare to freeze my soldiers?" It was barely above a whisper, feminine calm. It didn't come from Thorne's radio, which was still vomiting static. It didn't come from anyone in the platoon that he could see. It simply arrived, like the wind changing direction, and slid under his skin. He lifted his head, blinking snow from his lashes. "Who said that?" he muttered, mostly to himself. The answer was a gunshot that didn't sound like the others. It cracked once, clean and precise. On the left ridge, an enemy gunner flinched as if tugged by an invisible string, his body folding backward off his firing position. His weapons burst cut off midstream. His partner jerked toward him, confusion written even in the distant silhouette. Another shot. The partner pitched sideways, tumbling down the slope, disappearing into a spray of powder. "What the? Did you see that?" someone gasped. "Where's that coming from?" Kerr demanded, craning his neck, eyes sweeping the ridgelines. They had no friendly marksman slotted into Overwatch on any of their maps. Air support was on standby hours away. Their own designated sharpshooter lay pressed into the snow a few meters away, weapon idle, pinned like the rest of them. On the right ridge, a machine gun nest had been hammering the wrecked lead vehicle. A third shot rang out, slightly different in tone owing to distance and angle. The machine gun's barrel dipped. The silhouette behind it slumped forward. Snow puffed as his helmet bounced off the parapet. "Whoever it is," the mortar man breathed, "they're on our side." More shots now, spaced with deliberate rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Each cracked like a hammer on an anvil. Each was followed by a distant body jerking and falling, a firing position going dark on the ridgeline. Enemy fire hiccuped. Suddenly gaps appeared in the previously unbroken streams of rounds. Muzzle flashes winked out, then sporadically flared back as panicked fighters tried to reorient. Thorne could feel his soldiers watching, heads lifting cautiously over the rims of their shallow holes, eyes wide, snow clinging to lashes and beards. "What the hell is happening?" the RTO whispered. Thorne looked up toward the high line of the cliff on their right, where the rock face rose almost sheer above the valley. For a moment, through drifting smoke and glare, he thought he saw a dark shape pressed flat just below the crest. A figure, prone, rifle extended, utterly still between shots. He blinked, and the shape was gone, swallowed by the jagged edge of rock and snow. Another enemy gun faltered, its operator thrown back as if yanked. The whisper from moments ago echoed in his head. "You dare to freeze my soldiers." Thorne lifted his useless radio again on instinct, jamming the transmit key down even though it was pointless. "Identify yourself," he shouted into the static, voice hoarse. "Who the hell is shooting up there?" The only reply was another precise crack of a rifle, a distant thud of a body hitting snow, and the wind carrying the spent sound away over the white valley. 8 hours earlier, the world had been quieter, but the cold was the same. The forward outpost squatted on the edge of a wind-scoured plateau, its buildings half buried in hard-packed drifts. Prefab huts leaned into each other like tired men. Sandbags, crusted with ice, ringed the perimeter, more symbolic than truly protective against anyone with serious intent. The morning had begun with the rasp of zippers and the thump of boots on plywood floors. Breath hung in air both outside and inside, white ghosts rising from mugs and mouths. Generators hummed under canvas, the sound irregular, like a heart with a skipped beat. Inside the cramped briefing room, layers of wool and nylon absorbed the heat from a single overworked space heater. A map board took up most of one wall, lines and symbols drawn in colored marker across topographical lines that looked like tree rings. "Simple job," Captain Dwyer said, tapping the map with the back of his pen. "Escort detail, that's it. We're not clearing a city. We're not taking a hill. We're driving down to this resupply point, tap, dropping off our guest in this very expensive lunchbox, then coming home in time to complain about the coffee again." There was a murmur of half-hearted amusement. Most of the platoon had been awake for 2 hours already, doing checks and rechecks. The warmth in the room made eyelids heavy. At the back, near the door, Sergeant Reyes sat with her rifle across her knees, a rag in one hand. She'd already cleaned the weapon twice that week, but her hands moved over it anyway, working the familiar pattern. The barrel assembly came apart smoothly. The bolt carrier slid free. She held each piece up to the strip of light sneaking past the taped window, searching for carbon and frost both. Their liaison officer, a civilian in a thick parka with a two-new helmet strapped under his chin, sat near the front clutching a stainless steel case the size of a toolbox. It had 2 keyholes and a small digital panel. He kept his feet wrapped around its handle as if afraid someone would steal it from under his boots. The case contains updated encryption material and some other fun toys that are way above pay grades in this room, Dwyer continued. "Our visitor here," he nodded to the liaison, "needs to get to the bird at resupply point Kilo before 1400. Our lift is on a tight pattern. They're bouncing between valleys. If we miss the window, we're camping down there until tomorrow." "I'd rather not." "Sir, will the bird bring up real coffee?" someone muttered. "Only if you live through the day, Rodriguez," Dwyer shot back, deadpan. A few chuckles floated through the room, thin but genuine. Dwyer sobered and pointed to the broader map. "Hire has flagged some issues with satellite passes over this sector. We've lost a couple of tracks in the last week. Probably interference from weather layers or whatever exotic solar tantrum is going on. Point is, there's a window where our overhead eyes are fuzzier than I'd like." Reyes looked up from her work at that. "Fuzzier how, sir?" she asked. Dwyer glanced her way, then the lieutenant. "Telemetry dropouts. We get gaps. Might lose your little blue dot for a bit." could also make long-haul data sluggish. So don't rely on the sky to do your thinking. Lieutenant Thorne shifted where he stood, arms crossed. Sir, our route's still the same valley road? Correct. Dwyer tapped the thin line descending from the plateau to a wide, pale, U-shaped depression flanked by ridges. It's the only real route for vehicles. Road's been plowed. Weather's on our side for once. Reyes' eyes followed the drawn line, but they didn't stop there. She traced the contour lines with her gaze, seeing the bowl shape of the valley, the way the slopes converged, ridges overlapping in staggered angles. Looks like a good place for an ambush, she said quietly. Dwyer gave her a look that was half weary, half amused. You see an ambush in a chow line, Sergeant. Habit, she said. Keeps me pretty. Some of the rooms snickered. Reyes went back to her rifle, but her eyes didn't leave the map. Seriously, she said a moment later, nodding toward the valleys. Those are avalanche control marks along the northern ridge. See these little symbols? She rose and stepped closer, wiping her hands on her trousers before touching the board. There's an old service path up here, just above the main valley road. Maintainers use it when they need to get to the control points. It's narrow, but it's there. Dwyer frowned. Maintenance route isn't on our movement overlay. It's in the topo legend. Reyes tapped a faint, almost forgotten note at the edge of the map. If I'm planning a kill box, I put my guns up here, here, and here. She tapped 3 points along the high ridge. Use the service cut as a backdoor. Overlapping fields. The road below is the funnel. Thorne watched her, jaw tight. Dwyer blew out a breath. You suggesting we take the high path with vehicles, Sergeant? No, sir. Reyes shook her head. Too narrow, too exposed to slides. I'm suggesting we at least factor it into Overwatch. A shooter up there has more angles than anyone in the bowl. Shooter like you mean, Dwyer said. She shrugged, neither confirming nor denying. Thorne spoke up. We're already bumping up against the time window as it is. If we start rerouting or experimenting with unmaintained tracks, we extend the convoy's exposure. And if something goes wrong up top, we don't even have a road to hide behind. His tone wasn't dismissive, exactly, but it had the firm weight of someone who'd already run through the risk matrix in his head. Reyes folded her arms over the rifle. Understood, sir. Dwyer watched the two of them, then checked his watch. We take the valley road, he decided. We're not joyriding today. But, Sergeant, I want you offset from the column when you can. Pick your positions. You're still our point of the spear eyes. Roger, she said. When the briefing broke up, chairs scraped and bodies jostled through the doorway into the brittle air outside. The cold slapped color back into cheeks, stole breath for the first few inhalations. In the motor pool, diesel engines coughed themselves awake under layers of frost, exhaust steaming. Troops moved between vehicles in practice patterns, checking tires, banging ice off mud flaps, inspecting tow cables and turret mounts. Reyes walked the line slowly, her rifle slung, a small notebook tucked into a pocket. She listened as much as she looked. A mechanic leaned out from under an open hood, wiping grease and melted ice from his fingers. Ma'am, he greeted her. You hear that weird hum on the net this morning? What hum? She asked. Like a bug zapper stuck in your ear. Ran across all the vehicle radios when we power them up. Went away after a minute. Figured it was weather or some junk with the relay. Show me, she said. He flicked a switch, and the radio crackled to life with ordinary static. He toggled through frequencies. Nothing unusual now, but a muscle in Reyes' jaw twitched. Record anything? She asked. He shook his head. Didn't think to. She gave a tight nod, then scribbled a note in her book. Humming on startup. Possible test. As she moved past the last vehicle, she paused. Faint footprints marred the snow beyond the wire, crossing a low ridge a few hundred meters out. They weren't boot prints from any of their patrols today. That pattern was wrong, narrower and closer together. Overnight, light flurries had partially filled them in, but the path was still there, a suggestion of movement where no one should have been. She lifted a small pair of binoculars and scanned that ridge. Nothing now but scrub sticking through the snow and a few rocks. The prints vanished into a fold of ground. Sergeant, a voice said beside her. She dropped the binoculars, turning. A private barely old enough to grow a decent beard stood there, helmet slightly askew, cheeks red with cold. He grinned, showing a chip in one tooth. "Got any advice for a guy who's never seen real snow before last month?" he asked, stamping his feet theatrically. "Besides, don't lick anything metal." "You already licked something metal, didn't you?" she said. He sheepishly touched his lower lip. "Might have." She tugged at his neck gaiter, pulling it up properly over his jawline. Then she checked his gloves, tugging them tighter, adjusting the strap on his chest rig so it sat closer to his torso. "Layer management," she said. "You sweat, you freeze. You take your gloves off for too long, you lose fingers. Cold kills slower than bullets, but it kills more often." "Comforting," he muttered, but he listened as she made him move his fingers, flex his toes, check his socks. She caught her own reflection in the window of a vehicle as she worked. Dark hair scraped back, eyes lined by fatigue and years of squinting through scopes, a faint white scar tracing the back of her right hand. She curled that hand, feeling phantom cold from another mountain, another day. As the column finally rolled out, tracks crunching over the packed snow, Reyes took a seat in the rear hatch of the second vehicle, legs dangling, rifle across her lap. The wind tore at her face, clawed tears from her eyes, but she kept looking outward. On a far slope, a shepherd stood with a small cluster of goats, watching the convoy. He didn't wave, didn't lift his staff. He stood too straight for a man at rest. The shape on his back looked more like a rectangular pack than a sack of feed. A thin black antenna poked up from its side. Reyes tapped the roof of the vehicle. "Slow," she told the driver, still staring. The convoy eased a fraction. The shepherd, noticing the change, turned and walked behind the ridge, vanishing from view. "You see that?" she asked the driver. "See what, Sarge?" he said, eyes locked on the road. "Never mind," she murmured, as the outpost shrank behind them and the valley ahead grew wider. She lifted her binoculars to her eyes and traced the ridge lines, the faint scars of avalanche control cuts, the almost invisible zigzag of the maintenance path above the main road. She'd seen a valley like this before. She'd walked out of that one alone. The convoy descended in a long, careful line, tires chewing through fresh powder. The road wound between tall snowbanks like a tunnel carved by some enormous plow. On either side, the valley opened up into a U-shaped bowl, the slopes rising gradually at first, then more sharply, ridges overlapping in staggered layers like teeth. Reyes rapped on the side of the vehicle with her knuckles. "Stop here," she called. Thorne, riding up front in the lead vehicle, glanced back through his window and raised a questioning eyebrow. She gestured vaguely toward the right-hand side, where a low rise paralleled the road. He keyed his mic. "What are you thinking, Sergeant?" His voice crackled in her earpiece. "Let me walk the lateral," she said. "Stay parallel, but I want to see over the berms. If anyone's watching us from above, I'll have a better shot angle from the rise. I'll stay within sprint distance." Silence for a beat as he weighed risk versus benefit. "Stay within visual," he said at last. "And if I say mount back up, you sprint like you've got a promotion waiting at the end." "Roger that," she replied. She hopped down into the snow, boots sinking almost to mid-shin. The shock of cold through the soles bit into her toes, but she'd felt worse. She adjusted the straps on her pack, slung her rifle, and started up the shallow slope, parallel to the road. From here, the view widened. She could see over the berms into the valley proper, the road a scar through the untouched expanse. The ridges above were still featureless white, but as she moved, she caught occasional glints, glass, maybe, or just ice. Down on the road, the vehicles growled along, exhaust streaming in pale ghosts behind them. Conversation on the platoon net was light, intermittent. Jokes about the cold. Complaints about the music someone had tried to play before the lieutenant shut it down. She listened, but mostly she listened to the quiet under the chatter. They reached roughly the midpoint of the valley when the world ahead of them exploded. The blast came from under the snow, a deep, concussive boom that threw the lead vehicle sideways. The front end lifted briefly, then slammed down at an angle as the wheels on one side dug into a crater. The vehicle screeched, metal twisting, then settled into a dead tilt, blocking the road. Contact front, someone yelled, reflexive. For half a heartbeat, there was only the hiss of disturbed snow. Then the ridges came alive. Machine guns opened up from the left slope, their lines of fire slashing across the valley floor. Rifles added to the chorus, sharp cracks echoing, muzzle flashes flickering like fireflies in a storm. From the right, another machine gun joined in, catching the column in a lethal crossfire. Reyes dove into the nearest depression on her rise, snow swallowing her to the shoulders. Her heart thudded in her ears, but her hands were steady as she brought the rifle up, scanning for sources. Contact, left and right. Thorne's voice snapped over the net. Drivers, push through. Everyone else, dismount and find cover. The drivers tried. Engines roared, wheels spun, but the road was blocked by the wounded lead truck. The second vehicle tried to nose around it, only to hit a patch where the snow hit a ditch, lurching dangerously. "Can't push, sir," a driver shouted. "We're stuck." "Screw it, dismount." Dismount. Doors flew open. Soldiers spilled into the snow, slipping, scrambling toward anything that looked thicker than frost. Machine gun rounds chewed into metal behind them, punching holes into doors, shattering glass. Hunter to one to Sunray. "Troops in contact, grid," Thorne began, but his words dissolved into a harsh, rising whine. The same hum mechanic had mentioned, only now it filled the net. "Radio check on secondary," Thorne snapped. "Static." Then a snatch of something, P&G light at your, and then the buzz roared back, drowning it. Far away, back on the plateau, an operations NCO frowned at a screen. The little blue icon representing Thorne's platoon flickered, then vanished. He tapped the display. Check connections. The system showed normal function. Outside, the sky looked the same, dull, colorless, unthreatening. "Sir," he called into the command office. "We just lost Hunter 2-1. "Lost how?" came the answer. "Lost as in, they're not on the board anymore." Down in the valley, black smoke rose in a thick column as one of the rear vehicles took a hit and burst into flame. The contrast against the snow was obscene. Ash and soot rained down, dirty flakes mingling with the clean white. A machine gunner from Thorne's platoon set up behind an engine block, bracing his weapon, firing tracers back toward the left ridge. He got off a 3-second burst before rounds from higher up the slope walked toward him, as precise as a metronome. "Down! Get down!" his assistant shouted, but the gunner didn't see the last few rounds as they traced in. One hit his helmet with a sickening, hollow thud. His body crumpled, the machine gun clattering down beside him. Reyes pressed her cheek into the snow, letting the cold numb her skin as she scanned the ridges. Muzzle flashes weren't random. They came in clusters at regular intervals. She could almost see the geometry overlaying the terrain, a classic L-shaped ambush, anchored on that ridgeline to the left, enfilade fire from the right. "Lieutenant, this is Reyes." She keyed her mic, keeping her voice steady. "You're in an L. They're firing from both ridges. They've got height and overlapping arcs. If we try to push forward or back along the road, we stay in the funnel." "Options," he demanded. She studied the slope above her, the faint scars of the maintenance path, half hidden by powder. The avalanche control markers were there, faded poles jutting from the snow at intervals. "There's a service cut above, right flank," she said. "If I can get up there, I can see into their positions. Right now, they've got us scoped, and we've got nothing. Can we shift left?" Thorne asked, even as another mortar round thumped nearby. She watched as a squad tried. They crawled laterally in the snow, using a low rise as partial cover. As soon as they moved beyond their current scrapes, fire from the left ridge zeroed in, pre-sighted. Snow leapt in fountains around them. One man cried out and went limp, his body rolling partway down a gentle slope. "They've rehearsed this," she said quietly. "They know exactly where we'll run." On the valley floor, the platoon's mortar team huddled over a small tube set up behind the wreck of a vehicle. Their digital fire control tablet flickered, the screen glitching out. One of them cursed and tossed it aside, yanking laminated firing tables from his pack instead. "Give me an approximate grid," the gunner snapped to his assistant. "We'll walk it in the old-fashioned way." They fired a round. It humped into the sky, then descended somewhere far beyond the left ridge, exploding in empty snow. The assistant scribbled corrections with a pencil that barely worked in the cold. "We don't have ammo to waste," one of them shouted over the net. Another mortar blast from the enemy side landed just short of the last usable vehicle in the column, showering it with shrapnel. The liaison officer inside clutched his metal case to his chest, knuckles white, eyes wild. Reyes made her decision. "Lieutenant," she said, "I'm leaving this position. I'm going up that maintenance path. I can't do anything meaningful from here. If you leave the flank, I lose eyes," Thorne snapped back. "We don't even know if that route holds. We know staying here gets everyone killed," she said. "I'll call out what I see. If the jammer drops for even a second, you'll have something to work with." She didn't wait for approval. Some choices weren't in anyone's job description but hers. She pushed her feet and started climbing. Snow collapsed under each step, forcing her to drive her boots in deep, thighs burning, lungs tearing cold air. Gunfire still raked the valley, but most of it was aimed at the more obvious targets below. Even so, rounds snapped into the snow near her once, twice, exploratory arcs of fire, searching for anomalies on the slope. She heard Thorne's response as a garbled fragment. "Yes, on your just..." Then the hum rose again, drowning him out. She kept moving. By the time she reached the first avalanche marker, an old metal pole rimed with ice, her legs were shaking from the climb. She paused long enough to glance back down. From here, the convoy looked like toys scattered on a white blanket. Little figures darted and burst from one burnt-out lump of metal to another. Smoke smeared the valley, softening edges. Mortar blasts flowered closer to the last vehicle, each impact a dirty gray bloom. She could see the liaison officer crouched behind the open door, case hugged to him, as if the metal box could shield him from what was coming. On both ridges, specks moved with purpose. These weren't amateurs firing wildly. These were fighters who knew their ground. Reyes took one more breath and kept climbing. The higher she went, the steeper the slope became. She angled toward the faint line of the service path, where packed snow showed that something, perhaps only wind, perhaps more, had passed before. Her radio murmured intermittently in her ear. Pieces of Thorne's voice, a medic calling for more gauze, someone yelling about ammo, all threaded through with that rising hum. Sometimes she heard nothing at all. A round hit the snow-o-meter in front of her, sending a sheet of powder into her face. She flinched, dropping reflexively, pressing into the slope so hard her fingernails dug into the crust. They'd seen movement. She held herself still, heart pounding, counting silently. 1, 2, 3. Another probing burst chewed into the area she'd just left, searching for a silhouette. She stayed flat, cheek against the frozen ground, the smell of ice and old rock filling her nose. When the fire shifted back toward the valley, she moved again, slower now, using the avalanche markers and the slight lip of the cut path as meager concealment. Halfway up, she almost missed the winch box. It was partially buried, a humped shape just off the path, metal edges rounded by decades of snow. A thick, frayed cable disappeared into the drift above it, anchored to something unseen. She brushed snow away from the box with her glove. It was solid steel, bolted to the mountainside. The top formed a flat platform just wide enough to lie behind. She filed that away. If she could reach a notch above and see into the ridges, she'd need a stable firing position. That box might be the difference between a clean trigger break and a missed shot. As she moved, condensation from her breath was freezing along the lower edge of her optic, a delicate fern pattern that crept toward the glass. She cupped a hand around it, exhaling away from the lens. Every tiny motion risked drawing a watcher's eye. She slid behind a small outcropping and unshouldered her pack just long enough to pull out a small cloth and a length of tape. Shielding the rifle with her body, she wiped the optic, then taped a narrow strip of cloth along the upper edge as a makeshift hood, cutting some of the spindrift from hitting it directly. Ammo check. She popped a magazine out, counting rounds with a quick glance. Not ideal. She fired a few harassing shots on the initial contact before realizing they were wasted from her first position. Now she had a few full mags and 2 partials. Enough to do damage if she made every bullet count. Not enough for mistakes. Down in the valley, the pocket of relative safety around the vehicles was shrinking. Smoke from the burning truck had thinned as fuel burned off, exposing the silhouettes of men and metal once more. Mortars were adjusting, impacts creeping closer to their last functioning vehicle and the fragile cluster of bodies around it. Through the scope, when she risked a glance back, she saw the liaison officer's helmet bobbing as he ducked and rose, the metal case clamped between his knees. He looked very small from here. For a moment, another slope overlaid the scene in her mind. Different mountain, different snow. Men in lighter gear, less prepared, trudging in single file along a ridge as wind howled in their faces. A rumble underfoot that had started as a curiosity, then turned into a roar as the snowpack gave way. The world had become motion. She'd gone weightless, then buried. When she dug herself free, hands bleeding, she'd found only shapes in the snow where her patrol had been. Some had moved. Most hadn't. And then the shots had come, lazy and unhurried, from a ridge they'd never seen. She shook the memory away, forcing her attention back to the present plateau, this valley. These men, these sounds. Past failures were scars, useful only insofar as they reminded her where not to step. She refocused on climb. Small tasks. One boot, then the other. Keep 3 points of contact with the slope. Breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth. Think in angles and numbers instead of ghosts. At last, the lip of a hidden notch presented itself. A slight inward bite in the rock wall, just under the crest. From below, it would look like nothing more than another shadow, a trick of light. From here, it was a natural firing position with a view of the entire valley and both ridges. She slid into it on her stomach, pressing her body into the rock, heart pounding from effort and adrenaline. The wind cut across the opening, but the notch itself gave her shelter from the worst of it. She dragged her pack in front of her as additional cover and rested the rifle atop the winch box steadied forearm. She took a moment just to see. From this vantage, the enemy deployment snapped into focus. Clusters of fighters had dug themselves into the slopes, their white smocks blending with the snow, their weapons trained on the valley floor. A command element huddled near a portable antenna array and a boxy device with cables running into it. The source of the hum, she knew in her bones. Mortar crews worked in a shallow depression behind the left ridge, loading and firing with a rhythm that suggested they'd done this many times before. They weren't scattered bandits. They were an organized cell, well-briefed, with gear they hadn't assembled in a cave overnight. Reyes exhaled slowly, letting her breathing settle, the rifle's crosshairs drifting as her pulse slowed. She felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the world contracting to circles of glass and predictable physics. These are her soldiers down there, not by chain of command, but by choice. People she'd checked gloves for, people whose jokes she pretended not to hear, whose names she had written in a small, private book. She carried them in her head the way she carried ballistic data. No one froze them in the open while she still had breath. Her lips moved before she completely realized what she intended to say. The words came out soft, almost conversational, but they carried a promise she'd made once on another mountain and failed to keep. "You dare to freeze my soldiers?" she whispered. Her finger found the trigger, settling into the curve it knew as well as any prayer. And then, from the valley floor below her, she made the first shot that would sound to everyone else like it came from nowhere at all.